working to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus. We're coming to you live from Manila and Vietnam. Hello, Charlene.
Hello, I'm Charlene Navaja, bringing you the news in the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines, a Myanmar junta court will give its verdict next month on whether ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi broke coronavirus rules during elections her party won last year.
In the third quarter of 2020,
the Philippine economy grew more than expected in the third quarter.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas alerted the public on a 500 peso commemorative banknote being broadly shared on social media.
And New Zealand Trade Minister Damien O'Connor says trade and foreign ministers from the 21-nation Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, agreed at a virtual summit on the need to avoid erecting trade barriers in response to the challenges thrown up by the pandemic.
First in our news, a Myanmar junta court will give its verdict next month on whether ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi broke coronavirus rules during elections her party won last year, according to a source. Myanmar has been in turmoil since the military's February coup, which sparked huge protests and a bloody crackdown on dissent. Suu Kyi, 76, went on trial in June and faces a raft of charges, including illegally importing walkie-talkies, corruption, and sedition. Media have been barred from attending proceedings at the special court in the military-built capital Naypyidaw, and the junta recently banned Suu Kyi's legal team from speaking to reporters. Now on Tuesday, she appeared at the latest hearing in the trial for allegedly flouting coronavirus rules during the 2020 elections. A source with knowledge of the matter said she would testify in her defense next week, according to the source, adding a final order pronouncing the verdict of the court was set for December 14. Now, Suu Kyi faces 3 years in jail if found guilty. The junta court will also hear closing arguments in a separate trial for incitement next week as it begins to wrap up proceedings that could see the Nobel laureate jailed for decades. The military has alleged that the 2020 elections, which Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy won by a landslide, trouncing a military-backed party, were beset with fraud.
Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne also calls for the release of all persons arbitrarily detained in Myanmar, including Australian Professor Sean Turnell. Let's take a look.
I want to reiterate today that Australia is deeply concerned about the situation in Myanmar. I again call on the regime to cease violence against civilians, to engage in dialogue, to release all persons arbitrarily detained, including Australian Professor Sean Turnell.
Macquarie University Professor Sean Turnell was the first foreign national arrested following the February 1st coup that ousted Suu Kyi's government and sparked huge protests. Turnell has been held at insane prison in Yangon since his arrest and appeared frail and tired in court in the capital Naypyidaw, said lawyer Kin Mong Zhao, who is working on the case. Turnell was wearing a full COVID-19 protective outfit, lawyer added without giving precise details. In July, his wife pleaded for his release, citing worries about his health as the country endured a surge of COVID-19 cases.
Meanwhile, Australian Foreign Minister Marise Payne also met her Vietnamese counterpart, Bui Tan Son, Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh, and attended an ASEAN-Australian dialogue on women, peace, and security in Hanoi during her visit to Vietnam. Take a look.
Australia regards ASEAN as absolutely vital to our region's security and prosperity, and this latest milestone further reinforces that. We are deeply committed to working together in response to both the COVID-19 pandemic and indeed to the wider challenges of the future. To mark this new chapter, Australia has also announced an investment of over $154 million into our cooperation with ASEAN. They build on a shared commitment to ensuring a peaceful and prosperous Indo-Pacific, an open, inclusive and rules-based regional order, an order based on the principles incorporated in the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Our investments also build on our shared commitment to advance the women, peace and security agenda.
Minister Bui Tan Son, Excellencies, distinguished guests.
And in the Philippines, where President Rodrigo Duterte urged the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, to come up with a plan that would allow candidates in the 2022 local and national elections to hold even limited in-person campaigns. President Duterte said not all candidates can afford to pay for political advertisements, particularly on television. The COMELEC earlier noted a major shift in the election campaign amid the threat of the COVID-19 pandemic. COMELEC spokesperson James Jimenez reminded the aspirants to strictly comply with health and safety protocols, particularly when holding political gatherings.
Meanwhile, Mayor Sara Duterte Carpio withdrew her mayoral candidacy only hours after her younger brother, Sebastian, withdrew his candidacy for vice mayor. Now, this has spiked political buzz that only hours earlier shot up astronomically when her brother filed his withdrawal. Now, this has fueled the political buzz that only hours earlier shot up astronomically when her brother filed his withdrawal, with speculation swirling that the strong-willed mayor will run for president in 2022, either running under her party Hugpong ng Pagbabago or HNP, or she can substitute for one of the aspirants who are allied with her father. According to the Business Mirror report, President Duterte has openly sought to persuade his daughter to run, but she has repeatedly said she would rather seek re-election as mayor. This afternoon, I am withdrawing my candidacy for mayor of Davao City. VM Baste will replace me, Attorney Melchor Quintain, our vice mayor nominee. Just this for now. Thank you very much, she said in her Facebook official page. Sara has been wooed over to run for president, but earlier nailed her decision as final on not to run. In a post on Tuesday morning by the government television news unit PTV, it said, quote, "Just in, Vice Mayor Baste withdrew his certificate of candidacy. Councilor has confirmed it." Melchor J. Quintain Jr. in PTV News Mindanao, Vice Mayor Sebastian Duterte withdrew his candidacy as Vice Mayor in Davao City this morning in COMELEC, Davao City. The PTV post quoted Quintain as saying that COMELEC people confirmed him about the withdrawal. City Hall insider said Baste personally went to the COMELEC office inside Magsaysay Park and withdrew his candidacy at 10:36 a.m.
Senator Christopher Bong Go on Tuesday said that his plans on running for the vice presidency of the Philippines in the upcoming 2022 elections may be subject to change. But he said he will wait for the final decision of PDP Laban. However, Go assured that the public that even if he does not claim the vice presidency seat, he will continue to serve the Filipino community. Let's take a look.
Ayoko muna mag-speculate. Pero kung sakasakali mong pong mangyayari yan, mahal ko po si Pangulong Duterte. Desisyon niya po ito at desisyon ng partido na tumakbo po ako ng vice presidente. Basta isa lang naman po ang layunin ko, nabanggit ko po kanina. Ang layunin ko lang naman po ay magserbisyo lang po sa kapwa ko Pilipino. Kahit na anong kapasidad ko. Patuloy po ako magsiservisyo. Lalo na po para sa mga supporters natin na nagpagod na po. Walang kapagurang sumusuporta, naniniwala, umiikot sa buong Pilipinas para hikayatin at ipaalam sa taong bayan yung kandidatura ko. Nalulungkot po ako para sa kanila, sa mga naniniwala sa amin.
In other news, New Zealand Trade Minister Damien O'Connor said trade and foreign ministers from the 21-nation Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, agreed at a virtual summit on the need to avoid erecting trade barriers in response to the challenges thrown up by the pandemic. Let's listen in. All right, we'll try and get back with that news a little later, but ministers from the 21-nation Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group met online to discuss their COVID-19 response ahead of a meeting of national leaders on Saturday, including U.S. President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. New Zealand Trade Minister Damien O'Connor, hosting the meeting, said highlights included a plan to voluntarily freeze fossil fuel subsidies and commitments to liberalize tariffs on vaccines and other pandemic medical supplies. O'Connor also said there was overarching agreement on the need to avoid erecting trade barriers in response to the challenges thrown up by the pandemic. And the news continues here on ASEAN in Focus. Charlene and I will be back right after this.
Kwentuhang bubusugin sa impormasyon ang iyong umaga.
Love scam, oo.
Ang saklap naman nun, tinakbuhan ka ng
400, malaking pera yun, ha?
Bumili ako Bluma yan. Dumating,
Overseas.
excited ako.
Oh.
Pinunla akong ganun. Ako,
Oh.
talahin mo.
Tala.
Ating siyasatin, pinakamaiinit na news.
Ano po ang inyong posisyon tungkol po dito sa 13th month pay?
Gumawa ng pasilidad para makautang yung mga gusto magbayad na walang pambayad.
Kukuha tayo ng makakausap tungkol sa SIM swap na scam.
Yung SIM swap, yung one-time PIN natin na naka-register sa bank, pinapadala ho yan sa cellphone natin. Kaya kailangan ito yung SIM swap.
Kapag nawalan po ng kumpiyansa ang taong bayan sa digital banking system, napakalaking problema po niyan.
Mga bagong kaalamang hindi mo dapat palampasin. Araw sa Pilipinas noon.
Ang kinikilalang kauna-unahang national anthem ng Pilipinas.
Alamin saan pinanggalingan ito.
Ang ilang mga manggagawa ay agad-agad nang nakapila para mag-time out sa trabaho bago pa man tumunog ang sirena. Kaya dito nagsimula na masabihan na ang mga bulakbol ay mabilis pa sa alas 4.
ASPN. Ano sa palagay nyo? Kasama si Ali Soto at Pat P. Daza.
Marami talagang nangangamba na baka hindi na po i-entertain ng mga private hospitals ang PhilHealth nila. Ano po ang epekto nito sa amin po ng mga pasyente?
Kung sakali man po matuloy yan, na hindi na mag-renew. Ngayon pa lang po ay humihingi na kami ng paumanhin.
Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 ng umaga. Simulcast sa Net25, DZEC, Radyo Aguila 1062 AM. Eagle FM 95.5, Facebook at YouTube.
400,000 daw nakahabol pagpaparehistro. Kasi naghintay ng last minute.
O yung mga Pilipino, palitan na natin yung ugali natin na yan na last minute.
ASPN. Ano sa palagay nyo?
Welcome back to ASEAN in Focus. Malacanang on Tuesday urged the local government units to respect Rodrigo Duterte's current policy on the wearing of face shields in the country. This after Manila Mayor Francisco Isko Moreno Domagoso signed an executive order limiting the mandatory use of face shields to hospital settings, medical clinics, and other medical facilities. Let's take a look.
Alam ko lang po ay nagpulong po ang mga Metro Manila mayors at ang sa akin naman po, idaan lang sa tamang proseso. Ako po ang personal na paninindigan ko, dapat talaga tanggalin na ang face shield. Pero idaan natin sa proseso, antayin natin yung desisyon ng IATF. Dahil pag tayo hindi nag-antay na dumaan sa proseso, baka wala nang sumunod doon sa mga pulisiya ng IATF. No? So ang pagkakaalam ko lang po, parang hindi ata nakadala si Mayor Yorme doon sa pagpupulong ng MMDA, bagamat rekomendasyon din po ng mga mayors sa Metro Manila, sa IATF, na tanggalin na nga po ang face shield. Yan nga po ang aking sinasabi, no? Kapag nagkanya-kanya tayo, mawawala po yung ating tinatawag na, kumbaga, yung ultimate executive power na ina-exercise po ng Presidente. Lahat naman po ng lokal na pamahalaan ay kabahagi po ng executive branch of government. No? So sa akin po, kung ayaw nyo talagang sumunod, siguro pagpapakita lang ng respeto sa proseso dahil pinakikinggan naman po ang boses ng lahat.
Presidential spokesperson Harry Roque appealed to LGUs to wait for the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases final decision, which will also be approved by Duterte. Roque cautioned that a new face shield policy issued by any LGU might prompt the public to disregard Duterte's directive to continue wearing it in closed spaces.
Meanwhile, the Philippine economy grew more than expected in the third quarter, according to the government on Tuesday, as a rebound in consumer spending overcame pandemic lockdowns and other restrictions to rein in the fast-spreading COVID Delta variant. Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Chua said the third quarter growth validated the government's approach to fighting COVID with strict containment measures. Take a look.
In the third quarter of 2021, we contained the Delta variant and sustained our economic expansion even as stringent quarantines were in place. Our strategy was correct. The results are clear. The Philippine economy grew by 7.1% year-on-year in the third quarter. This is up from the negative 11.6% in the same period last year. This is among the highest third quarter growths in the ASEAN and East Asian region. On a seasonally adjusted quarter-on-quarter basis, the economy expanded by 3.8%. This indicates sustained recovery despite 2 weeks of the ECQ and a month of the MECQ in the country's economic centers. While observing the health protocols, our people continued to work and businesses continued to operate. At the same time, we saw the new daily infection fall from a peak of 26,000 on September 11 to less than 1,800 last November 4. This is due to the rapid inoculation drive from July to September, where about 19 million Filipinos were fully vaccinated. This careful balancing between COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 needs led to the continued expansion of most sectors. With strong third quarter growth and overall performance in 2021, we are on track to reach the high end of our 4 to 5% growth target for 2021. Year-to-date growth is currently at 4.9%. With adequate supply of vaccine doses, the government is further accelerating the vaccination program over the next few weeks. With current trends, we expect to achieve Alert Level 1 by the onset of the new year. To further sustain our growth this year and next year, accelerate the vaccination program, reopen to Alert Level 1 in January 2022, and maximize the use of the 2021 budget.
More than 2.8 million people have been infected in the Philippines, with more than 44,000 deaths. But cases have fallen sharply in recent weeks to levels last seen in February, allowing the government to reopen parts of the economy.
As soon as younger children are allowed to get vaccinated, the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA, believes there's no more reason to delay the resumption of face-to-face classes in the country. In a briefing on Tuesday, Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Kendrick T. Chua said it is possible for the government to allow face-to-face classes to resume by January 2022. Let's listen in.
In the coming weeks, the vaccination program will include children aged 12 to 17. When the approvals are made, we will soon include children aged 5 to 11. This opens the door to the resumption of face-to-face schooling beginning in January 2022.
As of November 7, a total of 64.2 million vaccine doses have been administered across all priority groups and the general population, he noted. Of this, 34.7 million were administered as first doses, while 29.5 million were administered as the complete dose. Given this and the steady supply of vaccines arriving in the country, he said it is possible to greet 2022 with a lower alert level 1 status.
Now back to the APEC news. New Zealand Trade Minister Damien O'Connor said trade and foreign ministers from the 21-nation Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, agreed at a virtual summit on the need to avoid erecting trade barriers in response to the challenges thrown up by the pandemic. Again, let's listen in.
It is free, fair and open trade that will help economies move forward out of this pandemic. With APEC comprising 47% of global trade, we need openness in our region to drive global growth. Indeed, it is trade that presents the solution to our challenges. Some 81 million jobs have been lost across the region due to COVID-19, and the impact on supply chains has been significant. But APEC members have rejected protectionism during this crisis. None of us are safe until we are all safe. It was heartening to hear that no APEC economy has introduced vaccine export restrictions since we discussed a shared response to vaccine nationalism back in June. 17 APEC economies have either lowered or completely removed tariffs on vaccines and related products, making them easier to access.
We try to ensure that APEC and the fora that we hold centre itself around practical responses to a global pandemic and to climate change. And in both those areas, all economies have participated with the type of, I think, focus that we require to get through this very difficult and challenging time, China included.
For us to judge, and we're not going to prejudge what China might have to change or do. What the members of CPTPP have committed to is to maintaining the high standards that were hard fought, hard won, and I don't think anyone has a view that there should be any movement from those standards. So it's up to the applicant economies to reach the standards that we have set and that we believe work well for us. I think we've all welcomed the applications by UK, by China and by Chinese Taipei. That's a separate process. Not all APEC members are part of CPTPP, and so that wasn't a core part of discussions. But nonetheless, as a trade and economic forum, all economies would welcome the greater movement and the reduction of any barriers. CPTPP.
Ministers from the 21-nation APEC, or Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group, met online to discuss their COVID-19 response ahead of the meeting of the leaders on Saturday, and that it will include U.S. President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. New Zealand Trade Minister Damien O'Connor, hosting the meeting, said highlights included a plan to voluntarily freeze fossil fuel subsidies and commitments to liberalize tariffs on vaccines and other pandemic medical supplies. O'Connor also said there was overarching agreement on the need to avoid erecting trade barriers in response to the challenges thrown up by the pandemic.
The Ministry of Transport has put forward a three-phase plan on resumption of regular international flights starting from 2022. Under the proposed plan, the first phase will begin in the first quarter next year, with flights to be resumed to China, Hong Kong, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Chinese Taipei, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Laos, Cambodia, France, Germany, Russia, the UK, and Australia. Arrivals fully vaccinated or recovering from COVID-19 will be required to undergo 7-day mandatory quarantine. Those who are not fully vaccinated will be required to undergo 14-day mandatory quarantine. The second phase is scheduled to start from the second quarter. Passengers with vaccine passport will not be required to undergo mandatory quarantine, but they will have to isolate themselves at places of residence. Arrivals without vaccine passport will be required to undergo 14-day mandatory quarantine. Regular international flights may be resumed from the third quarter, depending on the vaccination progress and the developments of the pandemic in Vietnam and the world. Due to the COVID-19 outbreak, competent authorities only permitted a limited number of international flights from and to Vietnam since late March 2020. The city government has opted to retain the plastic barriers in public utility vehicles, plying the city's routes as prevention against getting infected with the coronavirus disease 2019, when passenger capacity is raised to 70%. Public Information Office, or PIO, Baguio Chief Eileen Refuerzo said Wednesday the city would soon issue an executive order on this. The Land Transportation Office has allowed the removal of plastic barriers inside public vehicles, but Refuerzo said the city prefers to retain them as a caution and for the safety of passengers. The PUV drivers are also mandated to regularly disinfect the barriers using disinfectants they could get for free from the City Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Office.
In other news, the World Health Organization's chief scientist said she was looking forward to the second generation of COVID-19 vaccines, which could include nasal sprays and oral versions. Sumya Samwinthan said such vaccines could have advantages over the current crop, as they would be easier to deliver than injections and could even be self-administered. Take a look.
Many companies, many governments, many biotechs, academics started working on COVID vaccines, which is why I think we see so many. It's going to pay off, because if not for COVID, we're going to use these platforms for other infections in the future. So I think all of the science that's going on now is really going to be very useful. And it's not like the current vaccines are not good or not effective. But like I said, there could be advantages to some of the second generation vaccines. And we might also find that the mix and match approach or heterologous approach, where you take a booster, for example, with one of the newer vaccines that's being developed, maybe an intranasal one, or some other vaccine may come up. So I think this is a very positive development to see so much of research going on. This is fantastic. And I think ultimately we will have a range of vaccines to choose from, and different ones may suit different country contexts as well. So I think it will be good to have that choice. And cost will be a factor. Hopefully some of them will be really, really affordable.
Then 7.25 billion vaccine doses have been administered around the world, according to an AFP count.
And back to the Philippines, where the government is set to hold a 3-day national COVID-19 vaccination drive from November 29 to December 1st. President Rodrigo Duterte said in his talk to the people on Tuesday. The simultaneous massive vaccination drive also coincides with the commemoration of the life of national hero Andres Bonifacio on November 30. In this, President Rodrigo Duterte said, "We want to convey a message that every Filipino who gets vaccinated are heroes." National Task Force, or NTF, against COVID-19 Chief Implementer Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. earlier said the IDE 3-day vaccination program targets to increase the country's average daily vaccination rate of at least 1 million doses to achieve population protection. Galvez also said the government, in partnership with the Philippine Medical Association and its allied medical groups within the Rotary Club, will hold the inoculation by mobilizing the NGOs, government agencies, private sector, and the volunteers. He added that the initiative aims to further accelerate and expand the country's vaccination program, wherein some schools will be converted into vaccination sites for the event, likening it to holding elections. And ASEAN in Focus, we'll be right back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. Mailalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Hi, I'm Alex Calleja, isang podcaster, YouTuber, writer, director, at isang stand-up comedian for more than 12 years. Ang sarap maging komedyante sa Pilipinas, no? Dahil paborito ng mga Pinoy, pagsaluan ang mga nakakatawang eksena sa paligid. Pero dahil sa pandemic, ang kulitan, naging online na lang. Naranasan mo na ba to? Ginising ka ng nanay mo para tanungin lang kung kung anong oras ka gigisingin. Pero masaya talaga pag sabay-sabay tayo nagtatawanan sa mga videos na gaya nito. Ito pa. Ito pa. At ito pa. Kaya naman, heto na ang funniest Nakaball Videos. Ang natatanging show na bubusugin ang buong sambenan sa katatawanan. Ito ang bagong tambayan ng buong pamilya at barkada. Mula Lunes hanggang Biyernes nyo kami makakasama tuwing 4:30 p.m. Dito lang sa Net25. Dito, mapapanood natin ang best comedy videos na hinanap pa namin sa kasuluk-sulukan ng internet. So ano pang hinihintay nyo? Join na sa pinakabago at pinakamasayang afternoon habit ng tawanan at kulitan, ang funniest Nakaball Videos!
Welcome back. Asian equities dipped Wednesday as a record-breaking rally on Wall Street finally came to an end, with inflation returning to the fore as figures showed prices in the U.S. and China continue to surge. While markets, particularly in the United States, have chalked up all-time highs in recent days and weeks, traders remain nervous about the constant stream of data showing global inflationary pressures building as supply chains are snarled and demand spikes. In reaction, central banks have turned increasingly hawkish, with some raising interest rates and others paring back other vast financial support measures put in place at the start of the pandemic and which have been key to the rally in the world equities for the past 18 months. Shanghai and Hong Kong led the losses, while Tokyo, Sydney, Seoul, and Singapore, Seoul, Wellington, Manila, and Jakarta were also in the negative territory.
Ayala-led Bank of the Philippine Islands, or BPI, forecasts sustained growth of the domestic economy in the last quarter of 2021 on strong adoption of technology both in production and other economic activities. In a report on Tuesday, the bank said the domestic economy expanded by 7.1% in the third quarter despite the lockdowns last August and September. Adjustments from both consumers and businesses have mitigated the economic impact of the pandemic. The increasing adoption of technology in production and other economic activities has contributed to the recovery. The BPI report said growth in household consumption was partly driven by the expansion of e-commerce. It said consumers continue to prioritize essential items in their spending, with food, housing, and utilities accounting for 52% of total consumer spending in 2021 versus 45.5% in 2019.
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or BSP, alerted the public on a 500 peso commemorative banknote being broadly shared on social media. According to a Business Mirror report, the BSP said it's warning the public against accepting fraudulent banknotes and encouraging anyone in the know to report the use of fake banknotes to the police or to the BSP's Payments and Currency Investigation Group. Under Republic Act 10951, counterfeiters of Philippine currency are subject to the penalty of imprisonment of at least 12 years and 1 day and a fine not exceeding 2 million pesos. In the same statement, the BSP also warned the public against accepting fraudulent banknotes and encouraged anyone in the know to report to the police or to the BSP's Payment and Currency Investigation Group. Earlier this month, the BSP reported that it has carried out 7 enforcement operations in the first 9 months of 2021 that led to the seizure of more than 500 pieces of counterfeit Philippine banknotes worth more than 480,000 pesos. The enforcement operations also resulted in the arrest of 16 suspects, 14 of which were members of crime syndicates.
New coronavirus infections within the Philippine National Police are on a steady decline, recording another single-digit figure Wednesday. Data from the PNP Health Service show that only 9 new confirmed cases and 29 new recoveries were registered. The total active cases are 261. On September 28th this year, or more than a month ago, the daily cases were as high as 143 and active cases were at 2,092. Since the start of the pandemic last year, the PNP tallied 42,047 total confirmed cases, 41,661 of whom have since recovered and have been restored to full duty status. A senior police officer died of COVID-19 and hypertension on November 8th. The 125th police personnel to have died from the disease. The police officer, who was 54, was assigned to a national support unit stationed in the Bicol region. Meantime, as new COVID-19 cases among personnel drop, the vaccination rate is going up. About 91.27%, or 204,728 of PNP personnel are fully vaccinated against the disease, while 7.50%, or that's around 16,833 personnel, have received their first doses.
Case numbers are going down. Thank you, Shirley, for keeping me company today, as always.
Thank you so much, Alma. And that's the latest news in the ASEAN region. Thank you for joining us today here in ASEAN in Focus. This is Shirley Navaja from your Vietnam Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
And we'll see you back tomorrow, same time, same place, here on ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.